Beyond the gate, spoilers tease that Donnell noticed, in a flash of neon and cigarette smoke, the watch that had belonged to his father strapped to the wrist of a man who had nothing to do with the family name. He might have looked away, might have told himself he was seeing things. That grief made him hallucinate. If the band hadn't caught the light the same way it had in every photograph he kept hidden in his sock drawer. It was the kind of watch that wasn't merely worn, it announced itself. A battered stainless case with an impossible polish where an old thumb had pressed the crown for years, a faint hairline crack across the glass like a scar, and a clasp worn thin in the spot where his father had once twisted it on after a long day. Donnell felt the air in his lungs go thin, balancing between anger and the sudden, raw tenderness of memory. He had been missing more than the man himself. He had been missing the logic of a life that ended and left no explanation. Doug had been a quiet man with a private laugh and a bad habit of keeping receipts for things he never spoke of. He had been the hollow in Donnell's days and the person Donnell had used to define himself against, and now because of bruises, breath tests, and whispered promise, the silhouette of Doug was dissolving into questions. Vanessa, his mother, had given him answers in small convenient parcels: a funeral held with too many empty chairs, a handshake with the coroner's report that said accident, and a smile that asked him to be strong. But when Donnell saw the watch on a stranger, worn like the last piece of Doug's skin snapped. The line between grief and accusation is a short one. Donnell stepped across it. He had found out the one hard fact the police couldn't hide in euphemisms: Doug's blood alcohol was twice the legal limit. It read like a verdict and a riddle at the same time. In the sterile fonts of the report, fate looked precise: 0-16. Twice as drunk as the law would tolerate, twice as likely to make mistakes, twice as plausible, someone told him later, when they wanted him to accept randomness. Donnell read the numbers and felt his father as both a man and a statistic, a fallible being made grotesquely simple by a decimal point. It mattered less that the test was rigorous and more that the result forced a narrative upon him he did not believe, that his father had drunkenly wandered into death, a story without malice or motive, a meaningless capstone to a life he liked to pretend had steady lines. He couldn't lodge in the silence Vanessa offered. Her half-truths had always had the texture of protection, small lies to keep pain from splintering into the family. But the watch told a different story. A thing as personal as a timepiece didn't lose itself by accident, and Donnell suspected someone had a reason to hide that truth. So he went where truth often hides its face under the glare of patronized civility, among the clicks of chips and the perfumed sighs of the gambling floor. The casino was the opposite of a funeral: loud, disposable, lit from the inside so carefully that you almost forgave the pretense. He walked in with anger like a compass, the watch on a stranger's wrist a needle pointing him to a place his father had been on the night of his death. The air there was heavy with smoke and the blurred chorus of voices glued to televisions playing games of their own. He had little patience for the emptiness of polite betting. The carpet pattern swallowed his footfall and made him feel like he moved through a painting rather than a room. Joey was the kind of man casinos bred and polished to smooth, too quick with smiles that left you feeling both seen and measured. He presided over the floor with the ease of a man who had learned to shepherd guilt into pockets, pocketing tips, pocketing favors, pocketing little secrets. Donnell found him in the same place he always found the sort of people who'd been present at other people's ruin, behind a counter that served as a liminal space, a desk behind which men and women moved other people's fortunes. Joey's laugh was theatrical. He listened to Donnell with a patience that threatened to become condescending. When Donnell asked who had been behind the bar the night his father died, Joey supplied names with the casualness of listing menu items. Drake, he said, young, reliable, knows how to keep a tab out of sight. Donnell's anger found a new target in that single name: Drake, the bartender. A man with a face the casino had chiseled into anonymity. Donnell wanted to be methodical, to have facts pile up like coins on a tray, but the rawness of the watch's image in his mind made method slip into fury. He asked to see Drake. Joey's response was not denial, it was containment. He suggested, with a smile that was both invitation and trap, that Donnell should not make scenes. Drake's a good kid, he said. He did what he could. There was an implication, soft and quick, that if Donnell kept pushing he might be steered toward the wrong sort of trouble. The more Joey spoke, the more the rational part of Donnell's brain tried to correct him. Drinks have histories, drinks have tabs, and drinks don't decide to be lethal on their own. But that night, drunk on suspicion and driven by a need to touch the evidence, Donnell marched into the dim back area where servers wiped counters and fries cooled. Drake stood there, hands wrapped around a glass towel, his apron smudged with syrup and a red wine stain faded like a bruise. Drake's eyes told a different story than Joey's careful scripts. There was something in them that suggested he knew what it meant to be complicit, though perhaps in the passive geometry of survival. When Donnell accused him sharp, immediate of letting Doug drink too much, of not calling him a cab, of not noticing a man tipping toward terminal danger, Drake was quiet at first. He replied with the defensive humility of someone who has been accused of breaking the moral economy of a small world. Doug wasn't falling down. He was steady. He laughed. He talked. He seemed okay. He said it like a man describing weather, like it was a thing to be catalogued and recorded. Donnell wanted audible confession. Instead he got the numbing drag of normalcy. Drake insisted Doug hadn't been more drunk than any other patron who'd been allowed to stagger knowingly toward a door. He suggested, softly, that assumption had been Donnell's error. Joey watched the exchange from the edge, a grin carved into his face. He was adept at deflection, skilled at nudging blame into places where it would compact harmlessly. He threw out Drake's name like a piece of driftwood, then began to try to steer Donnell into disbelief by suggesting the bartender had no motive to harm a patron. When Donnell reached for the watch with the nakedness of a son reclaiming the last physical token of inheritance, Drake straightened, lunged perhaps, and said the watch belonged to him. He claimed a story as old as low-stakes gambling. Doug bet it. He lost. It was exactly the kind of thing people say about the collapse of better men, that loss reduces, that a man gives away himself a little at a time. Donnell felt his grip on the world slip. The watch was a relic Vanessa had given to Doug when they had thought things were better, an object saturated with memory. The idea that his father had wagered it away suggested an unspooling Donnell did not want to witness that Doug had been slipping, that the man who had once fixed lawnmower engines and mended fences had been making poor decisions in the glow of slot machines. Rage, bright and simple, flared. How could Doug have bet away a piece of his better life? What else had he thrown in the pile? But Drake's face, in close, told a different story than the tidy narrative Joey wanted to sell. He did not look like a man who possessed someone else's watch by chance. He looked like a man who feared losing what he had. Before things could get more dangerous, Joey intervened with the practiced cruelty of someone who knew how to manufacture mistakes. "We can't have trouble." He dismissed Drake in a way that sounded like a firing and like silencing at once. "You're done," he told the bartender, and handed him a small envelope like a gift for leaving. It was the kind of pistol method neatness casinos favored. Remove a potential hazard, settle quickly, and sanitize the story. Drake walked away with his head down and the watch still on his wrist. Donnell watched him go, and in his chest something broke again, because the man who had been the last to see his father alive had been effectively erased. The watch, however, remained. In a flash, sharp, like the blade of a kitchen knife, Donnell saw the band glint on Drake's wrist and recognized the scuff the way you recognize a scar on someone you loved. "Give it back," he said. It defended Drake as much as it deflected responsibility. Donnell had, until that moment, relied on a child's arithmetic. Good father plus bad night equals accident. The watch suggested a different sum. There were hands other than grief's folded in the problem, hands that had worked to make a narrative tidy. Taking it back felt like an act of reclamation. Donnell closed his fingers on the metal as if he could hold in them the fullness of a life. He wondered why Doug would risk a present from Vanessa, why he'd toss away something that had once symbolized a promise. The question sat in him like a live coal. He imagined Doug placing the watch on the table and, as if under the throb of neon and the thick lull of machines, agreeing to a deal that ended in misfortune. Each possibility was uglier than the last. When Joey texted Vanessa to come pick her son up, a simple, officious little nudge, their relationship was suddenly under the lamp. Donnell had seen corners of his mother's life that had seemed ordinary and harmless suddenly become opaque. Vanessa's face had a way of being both apology and armor, like a woman who had learned the art of smiling through harm. She arrived with the nervousness of someone who could explain and yet had already prepared digressions. She called Joey her business partner in a voice that clung to the phrase so tightly Donnell felt it stretch thin. She said partner as if it was a bank ledger notation, clinical, factual rather than a relationship that might contain secrets. There is a peculiar kind of betrayal when the person you expect to be a bulwark against the unknown becomes the person who holds the obfuscations. Donnell watched Vanessa's hand sway. Know our loved ones' hands by the way they move when they trespass. Hers hovered like someone afraid to commit to a lie. Every time she looked away from his eyes and toward the casino lights, it was as if she were scanning for an alternate path out of culpability. Donnell wasn't cruel enough yet to enjoy the suspicion, but he carried it like armor. He demanded to know why Joey and Vanessa knew each other. She answered with the half-truth she had always used. He helped with a client. We handle a few contracts together. Her modesty over the nature of the connection felt like a lock on a locker whose contents were important. Donnell pushed at it, and Vanessa's eyes moved like someone measuring whether she could step further. At home that night, with the reclaimed watch clutched in his hand like a holy relic, Donnell tried to map the things he already knew to the things that were being withheld. He remembered small details: his father's ritual of winding the watch each morning, the precise, patient way Doug would calculate the time he could spare for a project, the way he once had used a screwdriver to pry open a casing and showed Donnell a secret message etched into the back, "For the days we build." Those words, saved in the muscle memory of a son, made the idea that Doug would willingly gamble the watch seem grotesquely wrong. The watch wasn't a simple object. It was a ledger of promises. On the walk from the casino, the city felt more hostile than usual, as if urban geometry had decided to conspire with Donnell's suspicions. He kept the watch pocketed, feeling the metal against his palm like a heartbeat. His thoughts were a map of possibilities, some small and explainable, some large and violent. He could, he told himself, bring the matter to the police and let them bind it up with procedure. But over the last weeks the police had wrapped the event in hearings and forms and rounded off the sharp edges with words like misadventure. Donnell wanted something else: a break in the fabric, a seam he could pull that would reveal the mechanics beneath. He wanted to see whether Doug's death had been an accident or a calculation. He almost didn't notice Jacob until he collided with him. Jacob was thin and quick, the sort of neighbor who remembered everyone's comings and goings without being obvious about it. The collision was comic in a bad way. The watch slipped, clattered, and bounced off the curb as if gravity itself had decided to make a point. Jacob bent, scooped it up with the sort of carefulness that suggested he knew how much human history could be compacted into small objects. When he handed the watch back, his fingers were careful, as though anticipating admonishment. He looked at Donnell in a way that suggested he recognized him for more than the son of the man who died. People, in grief, recognize each other's worn edges. "You look rough," Jacob said, with the warmth of someone who didn't mind being direct. The watch had slipped open when he picked it up, a hinge whispering secrets. Jacob's curiosity claimed him. He turned the watch in his hand, saw the subtle seam under the back plate, and with a businessman's curiosity he flicked it. Inside was not what anyone would have expected, not a microchip or a list of names, not a lawsuit or a flash drive. It was smaller, quieter, and somehow more precise: a folded scrap of paper, browned at the edges as though it had lived in the watch's embrace for years. Donnell's stomach made a sound he could not wholly identify as fear or hunger. He reached out, but Jacob, with a boyish hesitation, kept a finger at the paper's edge. "Do you want me to?" he began, then looked up, eyes bright and oddly solemn. He was aware that there are things you reveal and things you protect. For a beat it felt like the city around them had paused, listening for the next move. Donnell thought of all the possible contents: the confession of a dying man, a note that read "Forgive me," a name, the outline of a place where a man had planned to meet fate. He thought of the way a single line on a scrap of paper could wreck a life or rescue one. Jacob's hands hesitated in a manner pregnant with possibility. The faintest light from a storefront struck the paper as he unfolded it, and Donnell could not read what was exposed. Jacob's mouth formed words and then stopped, like someone who had found a jewel but was unsure whether he had the right to flash it. "It might be what you're looking for," he said finally, almost too quietly. The drama of the moment had the thin quality of a set piece in a film, everything lined up for revelation, for the final, exalting gut punch. But the truth in lives seldom arrives at a cinematic beat. It curves, it hides in pleats, it makes you wait. Jacob's face was lit now by a private thought. He slid the paper back into the watch with a care that suggested he had become its second guardian. He said he would keep it safe for a while, as if time itself could be invested in a neighborhood boy's pocket. Donnell felt that hot, almost paranoid sense that everything was shrinking to a whisper. He wanted the note out. He wanted to pry it loose, to read ink and claim meaning the way you claim a birthright. But he also understood, suddenly, the precariousness of evidence. If the scrap was proof, it changed everything. If it was nothing, it allowed a life to stay unremarked, death unaccused. They stood there, the watch between them, the world moving on like it always did. Cars, laughter, the distant hum of something indifferent. Donnell, with the hunger of a man who had been denied truth, asked Jacob what he had seen. "I need to look at it properly," Jacob said. He was not evasive, he was careful. He offered to show Donnell the scrap later, in a place where it could be examined without onlookers. Donnell's desire for immediate victory warred with a new, small rationality. Secrets were fragile. Exposure sometimes damages the object that holds the truth more than any closure could heal. As they parted, Donnell felt the weight of the watch alone in his pocket, heavy with the potential of an explanation. He wandered home with the city along, indifferent scripture around him. Vanessa noticed the way he moved when she opened the door, like a man who had swallowed a secret too large for his chest. He didn't tell her about the scrap, not yet. He didn't say he had been in the casino, or that Joey had shown a smile that felt like a blade. He kept the watch on his nightstand, beneath a lamp that flickered like a cautious eye. The watch ticked on, its small hand sweeping away the present into the future like a metronome counting toward a revelation. That night he turned the watch over in his hands and remembered his father more sharply than he had since the funeral. He remembered the smell of motor oil on his sleeve after Doug worked in the garage, the way he taught Donnell to change a tire and the patience with which he would repair things. He thought how improbable it would have been for such a man to throw away a token of affection without reason. Each image of Doug rewired Donnell's certainty into another form of resolve. He promised himself that he would not accept an unfinished narrative, that he would not be consoled by statistics or by the lazy arithmetic of a drunk man stumbling into the night. But resolve needs time and a plan. Donnell had neither in abundance. He had fervor and a watch, an ally who held an ambiguous scrap, and a mother whose answers came in measured rationed contents. He had the casino where men like Joey dealt in the currency of obfuscated truth, and the memory of his father standing by the sink, hands in soapy water, humming under his breath. The night pulled its cover over the city, and the watch, small and obstinate, ticked like a second heart. The house remained quiet, but the claustrophobia of not knowing pressed into the bed like another body. Donnell could not sleep, his thoughts churned, and at some point he left the bedroom and sat at the kitchen table, the kitchen light a small, accusing bulb. He tried to fit the pieces into a reasonable frame. He thought of Drake's face as he'd left the casino, ashamed, perhaps, or simply tired, and of Joey's hand, always present, casually rearranging outcomes. He thought of Vanessa's hesitancy and of the scrap of paper Jacob now guarded. Every fragment suggested possibilities so large they dwarfed the man who held them. Somewhere in that stretch of night, amidst the clatter of a city that couldn't be bothered to stop for final acts, Donnell decided he would not let the matter lie. Morning would come with its own obligations, but he resolved to start with the things he could control, to get the scrap, to know what it said, to find out why a man like Doug would have to pawn a piece of his life. He pictured the ways truth could be structured, lines connecting names to places to motives, the kind of map that detectives build with string and push pins. He imagined how the scrap might fit into such a map. As he imagined, the watch ticked on, the seconds marking off an urgency that was less about time and more about a life that demanded a reckoning. And then, before he could plan the next step, there came a knock at the door, soft, practiced, as if someone had rehearsed it. Donnell rose with the watch heavy in his palm, and for a moment he felt as if all the loose threads of the night had been gathered into the hand that knocked. Outside, Jacob stood under the weak morning light, the kind of light that didn't flatter. He held the watch out with both hands and, without speaking, opened it again, revealing the folded scrap. The paper lay there, like a small, expectant thing, as if it too had been waiting for permission to speak. Jacob looked at Donnell and said only one word, the weight of which made the air around them peculiar.